Hey guys, I just wanted to welcome you to our first video for AP Euro, and this is really an intro. We're not going to be going over actual AP Euro content. It's more what we call the basics. These are the nuts and bolts that I hope will help you be successful in this class. I have two internet memes here. The first one says, "Take AP Euro," they said. "It's not that bad," they said. And you have the woman crying, of course. And I pulled these internet memes because I feel like, as humorous as they can be, they have some truth to it, you know. And many of you guys have signed up for this class, as I said before, because you didn't know what else to sign up for, and you knew that you're in pre-IB, and this is kind of like the next track you have to be on. And so, yeah, it's going to be a rude awakening for those of you guys who are not aware of what to get yourself into, and that's what this presentation is really about. This video is going to help you not feel like AP Euro is that hard, because I'm going to equip you with the right tools that you need to be successful with. Okay, so I hope you don't end up like this guy and feel like AP Euro is as hard as it seems. Okay, Alphonse de Lamartine once said, "History teaches everything, including the future." And this quote really captures 2 points. The first point is that history is very broad in nature. And so as history teaches everything, we're saying that it's so vast in what it could contain, right? History has recorded everything that has ever happened if it was recorded, or it could have been recorded. Okay. The second point is that history is an ongoing process. It's always been ongoing, always will be ongoing. It's never stopping. We are in history right now, and that's kind of the value that I've been, will be sharing with you guys, and I definitely believe in, is that we're all history makers. We're playing a part in history at this very moment. Our decisions, our thoughts, our words spoken are all part of what makes history. Okay, the history that we'll be studying in this class, we'll be going over so many different events, ideas, people, places, countless amount of information, and you are going to be overwhelmed. That is the reality. Okay, and as much as you are overwhelmed by everything that you will study, the best way to retain it all is to look at history through different lenses. Okay, so if you're imagining, you need to see history in certain ways in order to understand it better. Okay, so the different categories or themes we can say is political history, social history, cultural history, intellectual history, and economic history. Those are the major branches or sections and themes we could call it. Okay, the main point is that even though we can call, oh, this is social history, and we can categorize and say, oh, this is totally economic history, everything in this world is interconnected. For example, okay, we take a very political event, World War I. I'm sure we have exposure to it to some level, especially in world history. World War I was a competition, and it was a military campaign between major empires originating in Europe but taking place definitely in many parts of the world. And so obviously their economies, the economic history is going to be very much tied in, because you need to use your nation's economic funds in order to participate in war. And culturally, right? How did people perceive war? What was their idea of humanity? What was their idea of power and prestige? Okay, what was their idea in having pride in their country? And so a lot of these cultural ideas and thoughts were tied into the political event of World War I as well. So we can see everything's interconnected, and that's just one example. Now, when Alphonse de Lamartine is saying that history teaches everything, he also mentioned that it teaches what is going to happen in the future. And so the present day that we live in right now, August 2013, for my next year students 2014, and so on and so forth, the present is made up of the culmination of the events of the past, right? So everything that happened in the past says what happened today. But whatever happened in the past and today is also influencing the future. Okay, what is to come is what's happening right now. So make sure you're ready for what's to happen. If we can really take to heart, okay, what this quote is saying, I do believe that you too can survive AP Euro, and you'll be crying, right? Like, they told me to take AP Euro, right? They told me that it wasn't that bad. But you'll be okay, okay? You'll be okay. Just keep the significance of history in mind, okay? All right, in class, I should have went over Okay, what is the number one value or mindset you need to have in order to succeed? Period. To succeed in AP Euro, to succeed, period, and that is to love learning. Okay, to love to learn. Now, what I'm going to be going over for AP Euro Basics is one essential thing. Okay, the main core thing is that you need to know the skill that you'll need to succeed. Okay, the skill that you'll need. So the actual skill that you'll be using day in and day out is the skill of critical thinking. Okay, so what I'm going to provide for you is different thinking tools, okay, of how you should learn history. How should you look at history? Okay, think this way, right? There are 6 different thinking tools I want you to think about. No pun intended. Okay, so first one is think in big picture. You're going to learn a lot of details and facts, and I mentioned that. Okay, so many different details and facts that you're going to forget many of the non-important ones. So how is the best way to know and memorize and keep all these facts all together and not getting all mixed up is when you think in a big picture, you are thinking in terms of marker events. What that means is that major time periods or eras, things that cause a major change, for example, Industrial Revolution. This causes a major change, obviously, in terms of our standard of living, right? How goods are produced, how goods are traded and sold and distributed. Okay, and so the Industrial Revolution would be one marker event. In the same way, for example, let's say the Cold War, that is one marker event. All right, so think in big picture like that. Second way to think is to think in themes. I mentioned this, okay? I mentioned the political, economic, cultural, all that kind of stuff. So you need to think about what is going on politically, what is going on economically. Is this country growing economically, or is it declining economically? Okay, not just a bunch of facts like narratively, right? Like England was able to produce this many tons of wool in 1642. Great, you know the fact, right? But you're not thinking in a theme. So economically, maybe that's showing us that England is growing economically. Okay, so we need to organize information according to themes. Next way, think in chunks, okay? The difference between big picture and chunks is that in big picture, okay, there are one marker event that we can say that's one giant chunk, Industrial Revolution, right? In your textbook, it's going to actually break it down into chapters that are chunked into major marker events: Italian Renaissance, High Middle Ages, Scientific Revolution, Enlightenment. But there are actually within each chapter subsections for each country. So if you want to pay attention, okay, you have big chunks, big picture, right? Then you have little chunks that go inside that big picture. For example, okay, let's just talk about Industrial Revolution with that as the big picture. Okay, a sub-chunk would be what's happening in the Industrial Revolution in England. That's going to be different compared to the chunk of what's happening in the Industrial Revolution in Germany, what's happening in the Industrial Revolution in Russia. Okay, those are sub-chunks, those are smaller chunks, but they all fit into the big picture. Okay, I hope that makes sense, right? So when you study, think about, okay, this is what's happening here, this is what's happening here, this is what's happening here, and you chunked it really nicely according to countries. Is it always by countries? No, it could be chunking things differently, but the main part is don't just memorize facts linearly, okay? Put them in associations. Next way, you need to think comparatively, okay? By thinking comparatively, you are doing the very essential skill that you're asked to do since you're young, okay? It's to compare and contrast. Give me the similarities, give me the differences. You've probably done this a lot with Venn diagrams in your English class, sometimes in your math and science and history classes, okay? But in AP Euro, what are we actually comparing? We're going to be comparing countries, political systems, economic systems, different styles of art, right? Different types of belief systems, okay? So for example, we can compare democracy and communism, okay? We can compare realism art and modernism as a styling. We can compare different religious beliefs, right, between Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. Okay, and so a lot of AP Euro essays are going to require you to compare and contrast, and this is going to be something that you're going to struggle with. I'll say it right now. Okay, it's not easy, but with practice, we'll get it down. Okay, but just make sure you're comparing things. All right, the skill of an analysis is what we're going to apply in how to think comparatively. Next thing, think change over time. Okay, what makes a good movie or good book? The plot must have some change. There must be a dynamic to it. There must be a change in the storyline. Could you imagine, right? Let's just say you're watching like a James Bond film, okay? And we know he's an international spy, okay? Kills a bunch of guys. But imagine, right? The whole 2 hours, right? Honestly, he has no mission, but he's just killing people. Just because it looks cool, right? But even after, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you're just bored because what? The storyline does not change. Okay, so what happens in the beginning of the story, in the middle of the story, and the end, right? There needs to be a development in the storyline, also the development in the characters. Okay, and so as far as AP Euro, we're going to say, hey, how did this event, how did this idea change over time? How did it change from the 18th century to the 19th century to the 20th century? Okay, let's make a connection. Okay, maybe it changed a lot between 18th and 19th century, but it didn't change that much between 19th and 20th. Can we make connections and understanding why? Okay, so we have to think about that. And so that's a really important part, is that connections between changes is really what will gauge if you're really getting the material. Okay. Last way to think is to think like a historian. Okay, don't just read one source. Okay, you have your textbook. Don't take it for word. Right, you'll be going to be spending a lot of quality time with your textbook, but you need to have multiple sources in order to gather the right amount of evidence. To think like a historian is basically thinking like a detective. Okay, so a detective is always looking for evidence for their investigation. They are investigating different sources, different kinds of sources, where they're putting the pieces of the puzzle together, where they're analyzing, hey, you know what? This point of view is different from this point of view. Okay, I'm getting person A's account and person B's testimony. Okay, so imagine if we're looking at a king's point of view. Obviously, it's going to be very different from a peasant's point of view and a noble's point of view. And so we're going to be looking at how do all these different perspectives lead to the truth? What really happened? And so we're going to look at multiple sources, and that's important as a historian. Okay, okay. So this is going to be our last slide, and really quickly I just want to give you a taste of what this course is about. We're studying modern European history. The AP test is focusing you on 1450 to the present, which means that we're skipping over a lot of things. Now I will be giving you those things foundationally, what happened before 1450, but essentially we need to focus on what they're going to be testing you on. And so this is a very super big overview, super big picture, in the sense where I'm going to explain why is studying European history significant? Why is it even important? Why is there an AP test even asking you to learn this information? Okay, so the concept of Europe comes from the word Europa. And Europa comes from the ancient Greek language, where people in Greece, which is part of southern Europe, they're in these islands, and they say, you know what, Europa? That is the mainland, okay? That is the mainland, that's people over there. And so from that, the idea of this continent developed. And over time, right, Europe is going to be a place where they're going to influence the world, right? And so from 1500, right, modern Europe, 1500 to 1900 is where Europe is going to be combining a lot of different political, military, economic, technological, scientific ideas, and a lot of different developments are going to come out of Europe. Okay, and so these are kind of like those themes and the change over time I'm talking about. So over time, different types of things are popping up, major events, right, marker events I'm mentioning, right? So the idea of democracy, right, military campaigns, the world wars, capitalism versus communism is going to come out of Europe. Okay, the Industrial Revolution is going to come out of Europe. The Scientific Revolution, Enlightenment is going to come out of Europe. And so a lot is happening in Europe. And we need to say, why is these events important? How do they influence the world? Now, is history going on outside of Europe at the same time? Absolutely. There are a lot of really important things that did not happen in Europe that happened at the exact same time. It's just that this class is focused on, you guessed it, right? We just need to focus on what is essential to European history in the overarching story. Okay, the highest point, the zenith of Europe as a continent came through the colonial period, which we call imperialism. So you kind of remember this, is where Europe was establishing colonies, and from there they were able to influence those local cultures and societies. for better or for worse. And so sometimes they would help them, and they would want to educate them and really invest in them economically. Sometimes they would destroy their culture and ruin kind of their worldview and corrupt them and exploit them as well. Okay, so influence is not always good, right? There's always a bad side to it as well. We're going to see that Europe is known as what we call a modern continent, in the sense that how do we see and label something as modern is very much from the characteristics, the measurements, the things that come from European history. So, for example, what is seen to be a very modern country or a very modern society, like let's just say America, the United States, is if they're willing to challenge traditional thinking, right? If you have been taught in school before, right? Don't always think inside the box, but think outside the box, right? So you're challenging what the norm is, the status quo is. Also, what is labeled as modern, right, an index of modernity, is do you have individual rights, right? Do you have individual personal liberties in your country or society? If so, then you're probably living in a modern nation, okay? Now, the word modern, I must preface, is that it's really relatives, right? So something that is modern right now could be obviously same as described as modern from before, right? So like something in the 1500s, right? Let's just say the printing press was considered very modern because things are mass printed now. But when we say something from the 1500s, like, oh, that's ancient, right? That's a long time ago. That's not modern. But modern is actually just a very relative term. Okay. If a society or country has equality between sexes, between man and woman, right? It's more equal. We're going to say, hey, you know what? They're a very modern society. Okay. And so the thing that we understand about modernity is that it is rested very much upon what we call the Western world. And the West actually, as you can see in the blue here, okay, is individual focused, whereas the red, the East, is very communal focused. And so it's the community that dictates what's going to happen, whereas in the West, they believe the individual is what the West invests in, and they share this belief, right? We'll be talking a lot about East versus West philosophies, and it's very interesting actually, because obviously many of you guys are from an Eastern country background, but we live in a Western world, right? We live in a Western society, and so how does that kind of like meld together? And we can talk a lot about that this year. One thing to know and to finish off with is that in Asia and in Africa, there are a lot of growing movements that are anti-Western, and they are saying, you know what, Europe has been the cause and root of these problems that are happening in the world, right? It's because of them that we have all these corruption and exploitation, and the West is to blame for a lot of the inequalities that are happening, right, between the first world and the second world and the third world. And so this is kind of what's really interesting, is that in modern day, in present day, there's a divide between East and West. All right, so that is AP Euro Basics. That was kind of the overview of this entire course of what is important about studying AP Euro and how to be successful in it as well. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and moving on to the next thing.